MBA hopefuls. We are live on the air with MBA Waves, talking all things business and education. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, which helps us continue to create all this free content. Today on episode 156, I'm not a bitch, I'm a boss, rethinking women in business. We are bringing the focus on some ground realities for women in business, how business schools have been helping, and of course, there's more talk on the lot of work that's still left to be done in the space. I'm your host today, Krithika, joined by my co-host Bara and Eric. How have you been?
Great.
And of course, we have two very special guests joining us today, our friends and colleagues, Amy Duckworth of Empower Admissions Consulting and an admissions expert, Michelle Stockman, MBA grad and college admissions consultant, a producer and a presenter. A big welcome to you both.
Hello. Just a quick correction. I'm not an MBA grad. I'm a journalism school grad, but I have been an MBA for many.
Oh,
Yeah, wow, that's cool. And so jumping right into this beautiful topic, and it's so pertinent that we're doing this on International Men's Day. But yeah, like we have a lot to talk about, I should say. So, can you share a story, whether it's your own or from someone you know, in terms of what you have experienced being a woman in the corporate space? So, who wants to start first, Michelle or Amy?
Should I unmute myself? Okay, there we go. Basically, what I wanted to share a quick story about being a woman in the workforce here in Germany, where I live. I live in Berlin, and I've lived here for the past 10 years. And it's really interesting because there's a lot of efforts in the workplace to introduce equity and also within the culture. And one of those is celebrating Women's Day. And in the country, it's a holiday here in Berlin. That means that everybody gets paid time off. However, I have found that as a working mother, that means I have a choice between paying for childcare so that I can get actual double pay if I decide to work. And then because of the nature of my job, I actually only get paid for the days that I work. So that means if I decide that I don't work, then I have to provide the childcare. So in essence, the day is one of a huge amount of stress for me because I have to decide one way or the other how I'm going to juggle all of that. And it just introduces to me some of the conundrums that come with deciding that you're going to be an ambitious woman in the workforce.
Amy?
Yeah, okay. So I actually started my career in the defense industry, so hugely male-dominated industry. So it wasn't unusual for me to be the only woman in quite a large meeting. So that was very early on in my career. I then transitioned into higher education, and I managed to achieve a director role by the age of 30, 31. So I kind of felt like almost I was definitely felt like there was this issue of gender inequality, but I kind of in a way felt like, oh, maybe this doesn't apply to me. I've kind of made it to this senior role, at 31, I'm kind of, I'm doing pretty well. Like I've managed to kind of overcome these obstacles. And it wasn't actually until I was pregnant that I realized how categorically different my experience was to that of my male counterparts. So the first thing that happened to me when I found out I was pregnant is that I was supposed to go on a business trip to India. I could no longer go on that trip because it was advised that I shouldn't travel to India and being pregnant. So this is not this is just about how the situations I found myself in just wouldn't have happened if I'd been a man. So I missed out on that opportunity, the business trip. The other thing that happened is that an opportunity for promotion came up. My boss was leaving, and being pregnant, it was obviously my decision, but I just, didn't feel like it was the right thing for me to apply for a more senior position when I was about to head out on maternity leave. Again, if I'd been a man, that just wouldn't have been a decision, because my paternity leave would have been 2 weeks. It wouldn't have had any material impact on my on my work, whereas I was sort of looking at 9 months away from work. So it was it just didn't make sense for me to go for that role. And I think that's the point. And then of course I kind of realized the whole issues around maternity pay and childcare costs. So it wasn't really until that point, when I was pregnant, that I actually realized how different it is for women in the workplace. But even when you reach a senior level, even if you've already kind of managed to achieve a senior role, that you're still kind of you still have these difficult decisions and these obstacles to overcome that perhaps men just don't have, and their experience is very different.
Makes me think that investing in a career planner would be useful. Huh?
Yeah, and one thing that I took away from what you said was, it has always been something on my mind, that the work peak for women might come at different times, and we always need to navigate around. Possibly first, and initially it could be children, and later on it could be like being the primary caregiver for some of the some of the loved ones or other things and so on. So I've always reflected on how the work peak for men probably came earlier and smoother, and it's kind of like a direct path to leadership without too many speed bumps. But for women, it takes much longer. So would anybody want to comment on that?
Do you mean in terms of like career progression and how that looks for men versus women?
Yes, yeah. Like especially getting into the leadership roles, like you could go earlier, but then you have like other things happening for you personally, or having to take these breaks that kind of affects that journey.
Yeah, I mean, so from like, one thing I always had in my mind is, okay, I want to progress as quickly as I can to a senior position before I have children. I thought, once I've had children, it's going to be more difficult for me. I kind of just didn't realize that it would still be really difficult, even if I'd already achieved that senior role. Then having the break to have children, just because you've kind of progressed quickly, doesn't mean it's going to be any less challenging for you to navigate balancing a career with children. So I think this is also really important when we think about female representation in MBA programs, because if you look at the average age of people doing an MBA, kind of like late 20s to mid 30s, when do if women are going to have children, when does that typically happen? It's exactly around that time. So I think that there's a fundamental issue there for women with full-time MBA programs, in that it just coincides with the statistically most probable age that they would be looking to have children.
I'd like to add to that too, that I think it is worthwhile when you just talked about a career planner. Part of that, when you consider that the age that you might decide to start a family is when you are rising in terms of responsibility, or you might be deciding to pursue an education such as an MBA to gain more leadership skills, is to think about, okay, what kind of support do I need in order to, if I want to stay on this career track, to keep on going. And when I had my child, I was working as a journalist then, and I was able to do that because I lived in a country where there was very affordable childcare. I was able to travel, and I knew that because I had, again, someone I very much trusted. And in those early years, it's actually easier when you have small children, and you have someone that you trust to take care of them. It isn't as complicated to take care of them and their schedule. And this can also be extended family, like parents. My younger sister decided to buy a house right down from my parents. She has 4 children, has a very active career. And that's because grandma and grandpa live 2 houses down and can step in whenever. So it's really worth thinking that if you don't want to step away from your career, if you want to keep going, and your spouse as well wants to keep going at a particular rate, think about where you can get the support you need in terms of an MBA program, for example. What city might you be able to have that kind of support in? And then in where you decide to move in order to pursue your career. It is so much easier when you have people, an extended network that you trust. And that might mean making some different choices, but ones that will work out better for you in terms of your ability to take on leadership roles.
It's what I'm hearing you speak, and we're at such a strange place right now in the United States with the political situation and how people are viewing motherhood and working women. And so it's interesting to have this conversation now at this moment in time where we just had an election and we had two very different visions for what women's roles were going to be in our country. So I just keep on thinking back first, at Hillary Clinton and applying. I mean, she was a mom, and she supported her husband. And then when she went to take on the same role as her husband, like that, it was a flop. And yet she was the most prepared woman to take on the leader of the free world. And yet the society, at least here, was not ready for it. Whereas other countries, like you were saying, what city do you want to live in? It's like, well, what country do you want to live in? What country is going to see a woman as a leader and that can take on the role? And so interestingly, as far as the United States has come, we're seeing now that we really haven't come as far as we could. And I think it'll be interesting to see when people apply to business school this year, how that's going to affect. So I'm really interested in hearing what you think about that, because it feels like it's coming to that women have different standards still as men. And that, is this a myth or a fact? Do you think that women have different standards that they need to meet in order to get paid the same, have the same responsibilities, et cetera? Michelle and Amy, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think women are held to a different standard for pretty much everything, if I'm being completely honest. If you just look at like a very basic example, like, how we judge women based on appearances, like if you had like, for example, like in order for a woman to be seen as like professional and knowledgeable and good at her role, really she has to look a certain way for it to fit what you think means she's capable at her role. I don't think it's necessarily the same for men. I don't think the two, appearance and perception of capability, are tied in the same way as they are for women. One thing that struck me was really during the pandemic when we all moved to remote working. And it really struck me that we had this double standard for men and women, because, we're all just getting up, getting dressed, and we're going to sit in front of a computer at home. But you've got women spending like a huge amount of time, doing hair and makeup to just sit on the sofa or sit at a desk at home. They're not even going to leave the house because they're not allowed to. But in order for them to feel like they're acceptable in the workplace, they're having to, it's not because they want to spend like an hour getting ready in the morning, but in order for them to feel like they're acceptable to their colleagues or, their team members, they have to kind of, take these steps with their appearance. It's just a completely different scenario for men. So I think that's just one example. I just think that, the standard is different. We talked quite a bit already about parenting, and, the standard for, what we think is, if a mom is doing something, what we think, kind of, oh yeah, she's a great mom. It's completely different for a man. Like if a man just goes to the supermarket and buys some nappies, we're like, oh, he's such a great dad. Or, he's looking after the child for one evening and the mom's out somewhere, like, oh yeah, that's really great. Like, well, no, he's just parenting his own child. We just have such different standards, I think. And I think that the way we talk about men and women is just completely different.
I think that's a really interesting take, Amy, and I just want to go off of that and kind of what Bara was saying about looking at leaders and the leaders that we can aspire to be. And I think part of the issue with believing in women leaders is that the women leaders that we exalt generally are those who are known for self-sacrifice. Someone like Rosa Parks, or like Mother Teresa, or Princess Diana, who, was a beauty icon, but died young and will forever be that way, but sacrificed herself in a way for the country and for popular media. And then we have a dearth of women figures who are in political roles or who are in business roles who might be known as innovators. And I think that's where, and again, when it comes to self-sacrifice, generally the women that we're able to venerate are either single or they've aged out of having children and again are moving into more of a self-sacrifice role, or they are just venerated because they are the mother of a king, so to speak. So I'm not saying that there aren't women innovators that exist at all. There are incredible women innovators, but I would say there is a lack of expectation for that. And that's part of the reason that this idea of how to pave the path to that and have it all is not something that is really well mapped out in a lot of our minds as women. And mentorship is something I'd really like to talk on as we move forward in the discussion.
I hear everything you're saying, Michelle, and I also feel like there's probably so many more women that we just don't know about because they just don't get celebrated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many people that we're finding out now, artists, musicians, change makers, that they were just completely written out of history, right? So I have to believe that the same thing is happening, and that falls right in what we're talking about here, in that there's this expectation that, like, for them to do this amazing thing and to make change and be a leader, they don't always get the recognition, except if they're self-sacrificing, except if, right? Like there's like me, I don't know. It feels to me like one of my challenges with religion, with Judaism, is that to me it feels like, well, who was using the Torah, right? It was the men. It was the men who were writing it down, and the women are written out of the history books, right? They're written out of the stories. And so we have half a religion. And I'm seeing that mirrored in business. I'm seeing that mirrored in the arts. I'm seeing that mirrored places that they're just not given those same accolades. And I think things are changing, right? But man, is it slow, right? Like it's just.
But if you look at, looking back historically, if we think about examples of leaders and examples of effective leadership, it's really hard to find huge numbers of examples of women, partly because the opportunities that women had to them at the time were just, worlds apart from men. So, if you look at, like historical leaders, the women just aren't there. And part of that is women perhaps being written out. And part of it is just that leadership positions were not accessible to women at all at certain times. So, when we think about what good leadership looks like, when we think about effective leadership, the examples that come to mind, and that when people think of, what skills, what attributes make a good leader, we have so many more men to kind of look at as role models, both present and historic, than we do women. And I think that creates a real dilemma for women, I think, trying to kind of find their leadership style and trying to kind of forge a path for themselves in leadership. And one of the female leaders that I really kind of admire is former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. And she talks a lot about empathetic leadership and this idea that you can be both compassionate and strong. Obviously, she was managing a family at the same time as, incredibly high-powered job. But there just aren't that many of these examples of these role models for us to kind of to look at.
And
Absolutely.
sorry.
Oh,
go ahead, Eric.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, that was my cat jumping up. Sorry. And just to say, some of the examples of, I would say, women who do rise right now, especially in political situations, it's almost like they are rising to clean up the mess. So, we had Governor Cuomo resign, and so Kathy Hochul is now the governor of New York. We had Joe Biden resign from his candidacy, and then a woman steps up. So it's almost like she's only rising up to kind of clean up the mess. And I've read some recent articles about that. And I think that should be the end of my downer in this talk. I think I would like to say some more constructive things, but I want to talk about what's in the air, about how women rise, why women rise, and then what's expected of them once they do get to the top. Is it even an opportunity, or is it they're willing to take the job that no man wants?
Let's not forget about Liz Truss, right? She had the shortest term ever, right? After Boris Johnson. That was just a mess in the UK. I'm loving what all of you are saying. I think it really comes down to culture, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about right now. But first, I do want to say Princess Diana did sacrifice something. She sacrificed something huge, which is being in the good graces of the royal family to stand up for HIV victims, for so many, segments of society that were subjugated. I think she did sacrifice a lot. Culture. First of all, a quick story. I mean, today a colleague wished me happy International Men's Day, and I was like, "What?" I'm like, "Is that really a thing?" I thought it was a joke, and I was like, "Who's inventing all these ridiculous holidays to sell greeting cards or whatever?" I don't know. And they're like, "Yeah, it's a real thing." And so I looked it up in Wikipedia, and it did start in the 90s. And okay, so there's a thing, and I feel like it's a little bit cringy if we're going to talk about having a day that celebrates men's achievements, when I feel like men's achievements have been celebrated throughout history. It's like kind of having a straight pride parade, or like, I don't know, White History Month or something like that. It's just no. So, but looking a little bit further, they do talk about things like raising awareness about men's sexual health issues and supporting men into living a better life and being better people in society. So, okay, we can go with that. But I was not lost on the irony that today is the day that we're doing this episode about women in business on this day. So that's one thing. Another thing about culture was what Amy was talking about during COVID. And I would say, in addition to the expectation that women spend time in a different standard of appearance, was also the fact that they're also probably in the background dealing with the kids, cooking, cleaning, and so on. And like, if there was the husband and the wife at the same time that had to have a meeting, well, who has to sacrifice their meeting to deal with the kids or whatever it may be? So I've heard a lot of stories like that as well. And then in terms of like women being held to different standards, we spoke about like which city or which country you live in having an impact. And I think also the company that you choose to work for. So there's, I think, some research to be done when you're applying for jobs, and let's just say it, MBA programs, in terms of like, what is the culture like there? Is there a true support for women? Being a man, I've been in situations, I live in Paris and I'm from New York, two of the most progressive places in the world. So fortunately, I've not been exposed to too much of this, but there are times when you hear when in response to a woman leader has either, laid down a hard truth or had to act strong or discipline somebody or whatever it may be, that was not appreciated, let's say, by certain men. And you can hear them in some of the awful things that they say, and they wouldn't say the same things if it were a male boss delivering the same kind of information, news, or rules or actions. And so that's part of it. And I think culture has a role to play in terms of setting expectations. And part of that may be governmental. I think as a society, we need to agree on what is acceptable and what is not. So that said, I wanted to ask our panelists and all the women in the room today, what do you guys think are, let's say, the top 3 challenges that women face in the workplace today, particularly in positions of leadership?
I think we talked a little bit already about lack of role models. I think that's important. I think there aren't enough role models for women in leadership. And I think that another challenge that I think is women. This is a huge generalization, but I think that women in general, I think, care a lot more about being liked, and I think that this leading by consensus and kind of wanting like to seeking approval from people, I think it's more common in female leaders than men. I think that can make it challenging. to kind of, like you were saying, like kind of deliver some like difficult, harsh truths or something like that. Because I think, I think women just view those conversations differently, and they kind of the way that the impact on the relationship with that person. I think that women perhaps struggle with that a bit more. Those are two. I don't know, Michelle, what do you think?
I think I want to go off what you were saying again about trying to please people. And I'll just relay a personal anecdote. I think part of the reason behind some of the success I've seen is because I grew up loving to perform and be a people pleaser. I loved to act when I was growing up. And so there was nothing better than getting a round of applause to whatever I was doing. And I think I took that into my personality when I went into the workplace. So I'm always, after I would say something, I would say, right? And have a little kind of trying to elicit a response.
Like a validation.
Like a validation.
Yeah.
And in essence, I'm invalidating myself because I am not confident in what I'm saying by trying to elicit that. And that was actually from a very good mentor I found. She would watch some of the television appearances that I did. And she said, why do you do that at the end of what you're saying? You kind of like do this thing or like, right? And she said, don't do that. People are coming to hear the truth from you, to hear facts that they need to know. And you are undercutting yourself by doing that. So I think sometimes we take some of the training that, or I don't know if it's training or just kind of the way that the programming, right? That I don't think you would see a man giving a presentation or appearing on a serious program afterwards and say like, right? No. They're laying down the law. And so I've taken that out of my repertoire, so to speak. I've worked hard to take that tick out. Right. Yeah. So that's definitely one thing. The other thing I wanted to bring up that I think is a challenge for women is fit for purpose mentorship. And what I mean by that is a lot of the times when you aspire to be like someone in the workplace, leaders are men. And so it can be hard to approach a man if you're a woman to ask for their mentorship. Sometimes there might be sexual politics involved, and that's always a little uncomfortable, something you're always aware of, or you might have different interests. Also, if you see a successful woman, I've seen a lot of successful women as I've worked, and they just don't have the time. They would love to mentor, but again, they're juggling so many things. They're trying to be a serious leader, make an impact that way. They're trying to usually juggle their family. And so that shrinks the amount of people that you can look to and approach to have a mentorship relationship. But it's something I think is essential to get that feedback, to help you remember to keep reaching, to help you refine those ticks, I call them, that might undercut you and make you less of a, I would say, serious leader. What do you all think, Bara?
That's so beautiful. I mean, when you mentioned that, I just wanted to mention a quick story of my MBA female hopefuls right now. One of the things that I see happening with them is they need everything else in place before they even try to get into B school or something else. So they're so hard on themselves. So for example, if they feel that the score is like 20 points lesser, or if they do not have a certain thing in their profile, like maybe like a leadership role or something before, or they don't have a certain certification or something, they wait for everything to fall in place before they actually apply to business school. They really want everything aligned, and and again goes to the point of which Amy brought up of external validation. It's like always there's more so like behind their minds, there's always this necessity for them to prove themselves at every step. So I feel that especially female applicants should not be so hard on themselves. They should and they always want to prove that they belong in the classroom. and there's an added pressure for them to belong, because people can point and say, oh, you were a woman and you kind of like fill that gender card or the diversity card or whatever. So there's always this pressure to say that no, like, I belong here. So I feel that some of the female applicants, especially that I see who are anywhere between 26 to 28 or 24 to 28 years of age, they have this issue of not having, I mean, being perfectionists when it comes in order to make a point that they want to prove to the world that they belong in the corporate world.
Yeah,
Well,
oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say, along with what you're saying, Krithika, it also feels like there's sometimes, and I really want to hear what you all think about this, that sometimes leadership is defined in different ways. So that women might be leaders in one way, but it's not necessarily designated that in a particularly defined way as being leadership. Right. So let me see if I can give an example. Like, let's say you run a moms group, right? And you coordinate all the moms of the neighborhood to have, meals or do something like that. I don't know that someone would use that for a business school example, but they might. Like, why wouldn't they, if they actually put together this huge thing? But it might be downplayed because it is a woman's sphere. Whereas if a man put together a sports team that looked exactly the same way, it might be viewed differently because it's in a male dominated field. Like the way that we see different things. It's the cultural thing that Eric, you brought up and that I brought up. Do you feel that with your applicants that sometimes they have these leadership experiences, but don't even see them that way because they're not designated in a male dominated field?
Yes. And the short answer, yes. I've had conversations with clients where we're talking about leadership examples and kind of looking at kind of what stories they might tell, and there's things that that they've done that aren't on their CV, that aren't anywhere, because maybe they're like, oh yeah, but that was just doing this. And actually, it's actually a really great example that shows some really great capabilities and some really great leadership skills. I think that this is something that's really, I think, applying for MBAs, but also in applying for roles, I think women often can be, I would describe it as burdened with self-doubt, because you kind of think, oh, I've got to be, I'm not good enough, or, I don't deserve to be here. And, I think this is very much like a female problem. I'm not saying that there aren't men who maybe experience imposter syndrome, but I think it's kind of more universal when it comes when it comes to women. And I think this is something that when women are applying to business school programs, and just like having that confidence that you are good enough to be there, and particularly once you've kind of you've applied, you've gone to an interview, you've been accepted, at that point, like the experts, the people who are on those admissions committee, the people who've reviewed your application, interviewed you, they've decided of everyone that they've that all the candidates they've reviewed, that you're good enough. So there's really no reason at that point for you to be thinking, oh, I don't know if I really deserve to be here, because you clearly do. And I think it's just trying to kind of silence those the voices in your head that are actually maybe I'm not quite quite good enough.
I love that, Amy. And if I can come in here, I think it's important to teach yourself to figure out what you do believe about yourself. And I think part of that comes with finding a problem and solving it. And that's often where I'm able to help women applicants, again, show their leadership, and where I myself have been able to prove that, yes, I do belong here because I've figured out this problem and I've solved it. And I just want to mention one quick story. I had an Indian applicant who worked in media, and she didn't have a title and that was any leadership, but she talked about her ability to find solutions to please both the clients and also advertisers that ended up being a win-win for the media house she worked for. She talked about volunteering in a hospital. She was just a volunteer. But there was a domestic violence victim came in that no one at the hospital wanted to actually talk to because they were worried about her family that might be nearby and tried to take the woman away. And she said, no, she is a patient. She deserves to be treated. So these situations where we might not have the title, but we stand up for what's morally right and inspire others to take positive steps forward, or where we are able to figure out the solution to a problem. And oftentimes, maybe you won't earn the mentorship of a male colleague, but you'll earn respect and be asked back on that team. And you can study what makes that male colleague an effective leader by, again, being invited back and start adapting some of those traits. And that's one way that I've tried to put myself on good teams, is by offering solutions to whoever's in charge so that I can be around excellence.
Mm. What a lovely way of, yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say, I really love what you said, Michelle. I think it does start with that, like figuring out what kind of leader you want to be and understanding your own worth. And that takes work. I also think that not everyone is as strong or perhaps as self-aware or has even, let's say, the luxury or the privilege to do that. If they're struggling with just survival, right? I'm thinking global, right? And I think we really depend on both men and women who are in places of, let's say, privilege or have the time or the self-awareness to do that. And I think there's a bit of mobilization that needs to happen in terms of engaging with government to put those protections in place. And when I think about, for example, you have regulation with companies. Companies are there to make shareholder profits, right? That's pretty much their interest, right? They're not so much. Most companies are not doing everything they can to take care of the people who work there or the people who in the world. They're making profit, I think. And regulation exists to set some guardrails in place to make sure people and societies are taken care of, and that exists in terms of like staff. When I think about, say, like maternity or paternity leave, in France, paternity leave used to be 2 days. Then it went up to 2 weeks. More recently, it's 4 weeks. And in many cases, many companies have been required to do it. Like the government, I'm not sure if it's all of France or some parts of France or whatever, but government has stepped in and say, you must take it. So this removes the possibility that the company puts pressure on the man to come back to work sooner than he has the right to. Mm. And those kinds of things, I think, should be in place in terms of, like, say, women leadership. You mentioned Amy having to take off or not accept a promotion because of your pregnancy, and like having options like that, I
didn't even apply for it, Eric. I just counted myself out. I was like, well, I'm pregnant, so it, it was my choice. But, I think my reflection on that was, as a man, I wouldn't have been in that situation. I would have just been like, yeah, I'm going for the promotion. My 2 weeks paternity leave, that's not gonna make a difference, is it? That's not gonna affect. Whereas, kind of heading out on a, 9 months maternity, I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense for me to go for a more senior role now. Like, how does that make, it doesn't make logical sense.
Well, we can't change biology, but we can change the support structures that exist, I feel like. And maybe if you did have someone to fill in for you, then you could have accepted that promotion as well. I don't know. It's your choice, right? But, here in France, like, you can also, in some companies, relatively easily switch to 80% time, right? So you're doing 4 days a week for reasons of children and family, or switch to part-time or something like that, some kind of paid leave of absence, or at least your position is held. There's different situations, but I think these are conversations that in various countries need to have to put those protections in place so women can, like, to level the playing field. Like I said, we can't change biology.
And I mean, some companies you're seeing, it's not that common, but like around the same time that I went out on maternity leave. So I had like 4 months, I think, full paid maternity leave, and then statutory maternity pay, which in the UK is something like £170 a week. It's not very high. But obviously you have that entitlement to take that time off. And my husband had 2 weeks paternity leave. A friend of mine at the same time had 9 months full pay maternity, and her husband had 6 months full pay paternity. So you just think about, the difference, just in the, they live in London. So just the difference in, just down the road, just because of the companies they work for, First of all, like the financial stresses and pressures were very different. But then in terms of like the time out, the career break was actually both of them. And if actually paternity leave were longer, then having that time out that only really primarily applies to women, that no longer becomes a negative for women, does it? Because if everyone is having this time out and it's the norm, then it's not a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
love
it's so
that,
much
Amy.
and it's really lovely for the children and the babies.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And also, you never know what is going to happen after you give birth. Sometimes your baby might have complications and need to be hospitalized. And if you have only 2 weeks and your child needs to be in intensive care, like, gosh, that's such a hard sacrifice to ask of a parent.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't drive for 6 weeks because of I had to have emergency surgery. I couldn't drive for 6 weeks. My husband was only off for 2 weeks. So I'm like, okay, I'm stranded now with a baby. I'm also told I'm not supposed to bend down and pick anything up. Like, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah. I love what Eric was saying about in France, how that is actually a government regulation that men have to take it.
It needs to be enforced.
It does. And the thing is, I don't know yet if in companies there's enough women in leadership who might say, hey, let's make this a company policy, unless they're forced to by the government. I just don't think that has risen up to trickle down. And I think it is a culture that if you want to establish, you can. I know of a woman politician in New York who runs her office. She's a lawyer. She has decided that's the way they're going to run their office. It's like, we are in at 8 o'clock. We are out by 5. We don't dilly dally. Actually, they're out by 3:30. That's just how they have organized their day because she runs it. She's established the culture. And I think a man could absolutely establish that kind of culture too. It's just depending on what your priorities are and how you can, if you have shareholders, how you can sell that.
Which brings me to this question of like, what other systems are there that you guys have seen some of the other companies bring in so that it promotes more equity in the workplace?
I can just speak from my experience working here in Germany. There is also parental leave, and we're talking like a year with 60 to 70% pay, and that's for both parents. Some people, they decide we're going to take off and travel the world with our little baby, but it's meant to be to reduce the stress on parents, to ensure the child has a very healthy first year, and your job is guaranteed. Even if there's downsizing, you can go back to that job. So that is structurally in there. I would have to say, because I'm living in a country where that is with every company, I can't say, I don't know what companies have really good family leave policy. I'd have to do some more research on that, actually.
Yeah, I think that the family leave is really important, and generally, that has to be like that has to be enforced, like that has to come from a government level. You might get individual, like the one I mentioned with my my friend. Some companies will have things in place, but there's going to be the exception, and it's not the majority of companies. So I think having something mandated. I think affordable childcare. Michelle, in Germany, you've also got really great affordable childcare. There's some moves in the right direction in the UK there, but it's still incredibly expensive, which is another barrier for women returning to the workplace after maternity leave. And I kind of, I was always aware that there was a level at which, like, your salary, you kind of had to earn a certain amount for it to be worthwhile financially to go back to work. I just did not realize how high that level was. For for going back to work to make sense financially. I kind of always, just naively assumed it was much, much lower. But anyway, so I think there definitely needs to be some changes there. Some other initiatives, I think it's really important to engage men in these discussions as well, because so often you have like women's events, women in business, women in leadership, and it's all women at the event. And it's really difficult because how do you make those? I mean, I think then you need to instill in men the idea that it's their responsibility as well, and that there's something like, I don't know, you need to motivate men to get involved in these initiatives and to engage men, because if it's just women, going to women's breakfasts again and again, then nothing's, then it doesn't really change. So something like engaging men and something around allyship, I think is important. And perhaps we've talked about mentorship, but I know some companies have sponsorship programs as well. It's tricky with these programs where it's formalized and you're kind of matched with people, because I think these things really do. It's really important that there's a good personal relationship, and you have to have that connection with someone to be your mentor or your sponsor. It can't just be like, oh, you're matched with, this guy, and now it doesn't really work like that. But I think there needs to be some way that companies are facilitating these schemes.
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you, if you call it a women's lunch, most men are not going to feel like it's for them.
No, and it's always it's a lunch or a breakfast. It needs to, and it's always women. There's kind of like the stereotype of these events, and I've been to a lot of them, and it's not going to appeal to men because it's at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning and it's a stale croissant.
Yeah, gosh.
I agree. I actually get kind of really turned off by like even women stay here, because it's just more of a problem for me, and that's just not reality. We work in a mixed gender workforce, and we need to find these solutions together. And I don't know the answer to that, but something I do admire about German culture is that a lot of things are done by committee. That means it takes a lot of time to make decisions, and sometimes the detriment is there's not someone willing to step up and take the risk of making the decision. I'm the leader and we're going to take a risk and do this. It's more like, I don't know, but everybody gets to have a voice. And so these concerns do get aired. They get airtime. And I think that would be something to think about when we are, when we're thinking about the workforce that we want for the future. We need to be able to have all genders coming together and talking about this, so it's not just a one-sided shrill voice. It's okay, yeah, this is healthier for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, just like governments need to step up and put regulations in place to encourage positive change, like companies internally can do the same thing. Like, instead of calling it a women's lunch, like say, this is a required workshop that we all have to go to and discuss together. The topic this week is this. And hopefully there's no stale croissants or no French people will be there.
Yeah, exactly. It's how you frame it. And, if you frame it as a women's issue, then you're never going to get that buy-in and that interest from men. And really, in order to have, for real change to happen, it can't just be women. And actually, women don't make up 50% of leadership teams. So you're talking about, you're making it a problem for the minority to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sadly, it's less than 20% in and gets much lesser in the C-suite.
Yeah, and some countries, for example, like I read, I think it's Norway, they have a regulation from government. I think 40% of board members have to be female. I think that was a regulation they introduced quite a while ago, 2008. So I think there's some very kind of progressive policies from Scandinavian countries that we could look to.
For many things, right? There's so much that Scandinavia is they've been the leaders on. I'm also thinking, Michelle, you had spoken a while ago about how the leader of New Zealand, I think it was you, that you were talking about the prior president. How do you champion having different qualities whether they're masculine or feminine, that I think we could also argue, like whether empathy is a feminine specific quality. But how do you have all of these different facets of being human be celebrated as being human, and to be able to encourage that in all genders, right? And having that empathy drive, because that empathy is, I know in the United States, we're really lacking that on all different levels of society. So how are business schools even bringing that in? It feels like as we talk to business schools, Krithika and Eric, would you agree with me that we're really hearing about the soft skills that are being promoted, and for everybody, not just at the women's lunches. But I'm curious, also, how are the business schools working to attract the most diverse classes, and how are they working to attract women into a place that there is, I don't know if you want to call it a glass ceiling, or you want to call, like, whatever you want to call it. How are they doing it, and are they doing it successfully?
I can make one small comment and turn it over to the rest of you. I know that business schools are fighting tooth and nail to attract that female diversity. They would love to have parity, and I don't think that's false. I think I know they join organizations like Forte. There are loads of scholarships. They specifically, as one of the hosts of MBA Waves, I've talked to a lot of schools that are on the show, and they've all come to me and said, "Yeah, we're looking for more female diversity." So this is something that they want. I know part of it may be the fact that an MBA is, when you do one, especially in Europe, the age that you do it is often, not always, but the time that you might be getting pregnant. So that might be a hurdle. I don't know. So I'll shut up there and let you comment.
I think what I want to say to that is how to attract more women. I think when you're thinking about the longevity of your organization, you want a sticky organization where people feel like they can progress and where they are rewarded for their good work. And it's always, a balance. I mean, I go through Reddit boards and read some of the comments on the MBA thread about working, say, at Amazon. And everyone says, like, you'll last 2 years. And then you got to get out because it's a grind, but you'll learn so much. You'll be given so much bandwidth and expected to, make decisions that you might have to take a risk on. It sounds exciting, sounds great. But when you talk about trying to keep the best people for a long time, there's got to be a plan to make it sticky and make it so that they can fit in their families, which is part of, for many people who so want the human existence, but also just the fact that you want a place where you feel like you can grow and be valued. That's part of wanting to be human, right? And so I've also worked for an industry, journalism, where, they say they want 24s, a 24-year-old who worked 24 hours a day for $24,000 a year. And sure, you can get a few people to do that, say for 5 years, but then they're gonna quit. And so it takes a conversation about what kind of, I mean, it also is an internal conversation. Maybe you want that experience where you're going to be able to go hard and give it your all for a couple years. But to be realistic, if there's anything I could say to young women who are considering an MBA, it is absolutely worth it to train yourself to be a leader, but really be very mindful about the corporate culture that you want to go into. Be mindful about your partner if you choose to have children, that you're really having these conversations about who's going to carry the load. And if you both really want to keep going hard, then get that support system, whether you pay for it or it's in family, because that will save your partnership and that will save your careers and your energy to be able to spread yourself as you will have to. That was kind of a rambling answer, I know, but that's kind of how my thoughts are coming together.
It's good advice. Having those conversations early, I think it's really important. So it's wise.
And sorry, just one thing. I don't think that was really talked about when I was coming up, say in the 90s when I went to university. It was like, you just can have it all. And there wasn't this serious talk about what it means and how you can plan to have it all. And I think that's got to be more of the conversation.
Yeah, I agree with what Michelle said. And I think just building on that, I think it's this, we kind of believe that, opportunities are open to women, and, we kind of say, oh yeah, you can have it all, you can be anything you want to be. And maybe it is, you can, in theory, have it all, but you can't have it all at the same time. And so it's putting that plan in place for what you want to have when, and what you want to prioritize at what stage. And, if you do kind of decide to go down the MBA route, and, that will, help accelerate your career into senior leadership positions, and then you could actually be part of shaping what that looks like for future generations of women. Because I think, so far, like, really, we talk a lot about, how women should, what women can do to get ahead in the current system, and what women can, how women can, act differently, or make, almost the women need to adapt in order to thrive in the, the kind of systems that we have in place, when actually, it's are the environments that we have, both, in workplaces, but also in society as a whole, are they fit for purpose anymore? And actually there needs to be wider changes, rather than just focusing on, well, women, you could do this and you could do that. It's actually, and if you kind of want to help to shape that, then an MBA and progressing into a senior leadership route could be a way that you could actually be part of creating change for future generations.
You guys talking about having it all makes me think of that comedian Michelle Wolf. I don't know if you guys know her, but she does a whole bit about having it all. And like, I don't want to have it all. Like, and you think about it, we're women and equality in terms of working, in terms of voting. This is like only 100 years old, right? It was like, I think 1919, the UK got women's suffrage, and in 1920, the US, and so on and so on. Switzerland was like strangely late, 73. Sorry to call you out there, Switzerland. But we're still like learning as a species how to do this. And I think, when Michelle pointed out, when she was at the age of like graduating university and so on, like, we're like, okay, you can have this, but there weren't the support. There weren't, I suppose, the conversations that needed to be had that we're talking about right now, and how to be better prepared and to be aligned with the people that are the other stakeholders, like a partner, like parents, like employers, and so on. But I would just say, in my small 2 cents there, is like, when you're looking at MBA programs, do that research, talk to women who've gone there, talk to women in the program, what kind of support services exist. I just remember when I was working at ESSEC Business School, I attended one of the workshops that was about salary negotiation for women, which I thought was fantastic. And the room was about 100 women and maybe 5 or 6 men. But it was really great that they at least got into that conversation and addressed some of the things that we already talked about here, like imposter syndrome and some of these other things, like seeking validation, which not all women and certainly some men have these things too, but there's this more of a tendency, let's say. So yeah, choose your MBA program wisely.
And programs do so much for the spouses and partners as well, in order to help. So I'm going to ask one last question here. How can men be better allies?
Listen, and that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I think it's listening. It's actually taking the time to understand the issues from the female perspective, because I think oftentimes that isn't the case, and sometimes like diversity initiatives and engaging men, like, oh, you've got to do this diversity and inclusion training or something like that. It's a tick box, but I think actually listening, asking the questions, and really taking the time to genuinely listen and understand the response, I think that is really important.
Yeah. What I would say is, part of me wishes there was some kind of experiment where a boss, well, there are shows like this, Undercover Boss, where a boss might do all the things that the woman he employs does during the day, not only on the job, but at home. And I think if there was kind of that swap in a way, might help change some of the way that the American workforce, or some of the changes that have happened in the global workforce as well, but would help enlighten people to this idea that there is a huge load when it comes to working women who either are taking care of children or parents. There is just a huge amount that needs to be processed and organized, and they'd be amazed at the superpower and what is going on in a lot of their women employees' minds. And that might help make some of these changes without having to wait until women rise to the top of many more of these global companies and can kind of change these cultures. But I really think you got to walk in someone's shoes. And I know that's a bit of a pipe dream, but I can say my father is someone who I would say was an excellent girl dad and wife spouse. He always was ready to put on an apron in the kitchen. He told me I could be whatever I wanted. I had different messages from my mother. It was all about, hey, you got to get married, which didn't work out too well for me. But what I would say is we need to help. We need to help women know that they're valued. But women, the advice I have to make sure you know your value is to, again, find the problems you can solve and become an expert at that, so you believe in yourself. Find a mentor who you trust, who can give you feedback on how you can just make some quick nudges to be better. And then ally yourself with men who you think are good leaders so that you can work closely to them and copy them in a way. I mean, copy what's doing good, but put your own spin on it. These are 3 actionable things I would say when I think about how to actually move up and what I wish would happen in terms of people realizing the changes that need to be made.
Love it.
Thanks so much, Michelle. That was a lovely way to end this conversation today, which is a very important topic. And especially for all those female MBA hopefuls, you heard it here. Plan your career early, get your support system in place, and of course, figure out the mentor who's going to help you soar. And as I said, that you can't have it all, but you can definitely have it all at different stages in your life, and you're going to have it. And we need more women leaders like you. So we hope that you definitely will apply to business school. I want to thank our featured guests, Amy and Michelle, for their really wonderful take and sharing their stories. If you like today's episode, please give us a little thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to MBA Waves to stay on top of all the latest trends and news in the world of MBAs, business, and education. Don't forget to check us out next week, same time and place. And for full access to upcoming and past episodes, please head to mbawaves.com. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.